It's taken 6 videos, but we are finally wrapping up this chapter. And because this is the last video for this chapter, it's time for the questionable life advice contained herein. Peterson likes his surroundings skated upon because we embrace chaos and danger to improve skills. Working to improve things is inferior to working to prevent bad things. Caring about the world in the wrong way will lead to your destruction, and cool it with the environmentalism. The Earth started it, and we deserve to be cut some slack. If trends continue, men won't go to university. Girls can win at boy games, but boys shouldn't win or even compete at girl games, or be bested by a girl, because winning at those games is meaningless, and losing is even worse. Feminism is screwing over men and women, and the patriarchy can't be all that bad because some men have helped some women. But fighting against the patriarchy is bad because that leads to political activism. Marxism is bad because of communism, specifically what happened in the USSR, China, Cambodia, and North Korea. Hierarchies are a fact of life, and postmodern neo-Marxists are either trying to get rid of group identities or boost some to an absurd degree. Equality of outcome is bad and impractical. Boys will be boys, and aggression is a good thing except when wielded by a person with antisocial personality disorder. Feminine people, or personality traits, need to be rescued by masculine people, or personality traits, a la Disney, pre-Frozen. Men need to be manly men in order to attract good wives, or else. Alright, let's find out ultimately why we should leave kids alone when they're skateboarding. This video made possible thanks to the continuing support of viewers, patrons, and PayPal pals like you. Thanks! Hi! Welcome back to the channel. We are finally at the end of this chapter, which means there is only one more rule left, and the coda. Let's see if I can get these done before the sequel comes out. Really quick, there's a little Peterson news. He's back at home, in the usual home office, and is still on the mend and working on some projects. That is your Peterson news update. There's still a bit to talk about in this chapter, so let's get to it. Quick refresher for the visual cues for who's talking. This means I'm paraphrasing the book. This means I'm sharing my opinion or integrating the book with science. This can be things Peterson referenced or research I'm bringing to the party. Alrighty, let's see how toughening up, we mere weasels, allows us to let kids skateboard. Apparently, the turbulence we hit in the last part, causing our descent into style madness early, has passed. And with what's coming next, I kinda miss it. When Peterson was younger, he worked on a railway in Saskatchewan, and we're going to skip over his discussion of his Northern Cree Indian co-workers to get to the point.
Every man in that all-male group was tested by the others during the first 2 weeks or so of their hiring. When a new guy first showed up, the other workers would inevitably provide him with an insulting nickname. They called me Howdy Doody after I was accepted as a crew member, something I'm still slightly embarrassed to admit.
In case you aren't familiar, allow me to expose you to this piece of media history.
Howdy doody 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 ho ho ho! Well, howdy doody kids and hi, Misty Smith. Hi, little guy, howdy. And Clarabelle, look at all the kids at home and all the kids in the gallery. What time is it, kids? Howdy doody time.
The more you know. Also, a little bit of the story doesn't make sense here. The nickname would be given when the guy showed up, but Peterson's was given after he was accepted by the crew. This will come up in a sec.
Working men are often extremely funny, in a caustic, biting, insulting manner, as discussed in Rule 9. They are always harassing each other, partly for amusement, partly to score points in the eternal dominance battle between them, but also partly to see what the other guy will do if he is subjected to social stress. It's part of the process of character evaluation, as well as camaraderie.
Yes, this only shows up among working men, no other work or social environments. And of course, Peterson knows his coworkers' motivations for these behaviors. Let's keep going before really sinking our teeth in.
When it works well, when everybody gets and gives as good as they get, and can give and take, it's a big part of what allows men who work for a living to tolerate or even enjoy laying pipe,
Phrasing?
And working on oil rigs, and lumberjacking, and working in restaurant kitchens, and all the other hot, dirty, physically demanding, and dangerous work that is still done almost totally by men.
I don't have experience working these types of jobs. But Dr. Mr. the husband is a certified miner, so he does. This next part is a result of me picking his brain about working in these types of environments. And yeah, I know this is going to result in a bit of Peterson's experience in the 80s versus my husband's experience for the past 15 years, but we are about sharing experiences in this channel. My husband suspects the cause of these sorts of behaviors is a combination of boredom, just trying to make work fun, and entertainment. He doesn't think dominance hierarchies come into play, as he's seen a fair amount of joshing happening up and down the management tree. Additionally, he thinks it's even divorced from the corporate hierarchy, so it doesn't factor into who's promoted or anything. He also doesn't think this is exclusive to the working man environment. He's seen similar levels of friendly shit-tossing in different mines he's been in different physics labs he's been in different social situations he's been in. It's just friendly teasing. This will be more relevant as we continue in Peterson's story, but in my husband's experience, somebody who's a bit of a stick in the mud and doesn't really have a sense of humor doesn't get more harassment. If anything, they get given a wider berth and not really played with as much. There's no point, it's not as fun. And if anything, more shit is said behind their back because you can't just blow off steam with them. My husband doesn't think this is done to see who's a liability and who's not. And in his experience, women aren't treated differently than men, and partake in the activities just as much as men. If anything, the real difference in who participates and who doesn't is by personality, not by gender. Final note for my husband that'll make more sense in a second. This joking around wasn't about being super macho and masculine. There was a fair amount of joke flirting that would happen irrespective of gender or orientation. And altogether, this fun, joking, teasing environment reminds me of my experience in different dance groups, which were mostly women and a couple gay guys and some straight guys. Last thing here regarding men working the restaurant kitchens. I have a friend who worked at McDonald's for a period of time. He pointed out that it would typically be the women working the registers and men in the back cooking the food. And he said that this was a managerial decision to keep the attractive staff the interface point for customers. And this is also my cousin's experience working at regular restaurants. Food for thought.
Not too long after I started on the rail crew, my name was changed to Howdy. This was a great improvement, as it had a good Western connotation and was not obviously linked to that stupid puppet.
Attentive viewers may have noticed some slight howdy Petersoning in the previous videos for this chapter. The guy hired after Peterson was nicknamed Lunch Bucket because he didn't bring a brown bag lunch like everybody else, and he had a temper, was quick to chuck people under the bus, and didn't have a sense of humor. This all was not received well by the rest of the crew, and by this guy's third day, he was receiving overt harassment. People would chuck rocks at his helmet when he wasn't paying attention, which would make a funny little noise, make him mad, much to the amusement of the crew, and after a couple days of this, he quit. Lunchbox got his nickname before he was accepted by the crew. Also, I'm not denying Peterson's telling of the story here, just pointing out that it doesn't really mesh with my husband's experience for people who don't really play along and are kind of jerks.
Men enforce a code of behavior on each other when working together. Do your work, pull your weight, stay awake and pay attention. Don't whine or be touchy. Stand up for your friends. Don't suck up and don't snitch. Don't be a slave to stupid rules. Don't, in the immortal words of Arnold Schwarzenegger, be a girly man. Don't be dependent at all, ever, period. The harassment that is part of acceptance on a working crew is a test. Are you tough, entertaining, competent, and reliable? If not, go away. Simple as that. We don't need to feel sorry for you. We don't want to put up with your narcissism, and we don't want to do your work.
On the one hand, yeah, you don't want to have to be pulling somebody else's weight if they aren't doing their share. On the other hand, are several fingers. There's a bit of toxic masculinity mixed in here. Peterson, the all-knowing, all-seeing, knows this is about narcissism. Because of course. I would think that a fair bit of this could be accomplished without harassment, and Arnold apparently regretted saying that quote. In an interview with Men's Health, Schwarzenegger said that, at the time, it felt like the right thing to do. It was in my gut. I improvised it. I called them girly men because they weren't willing to take risks. They were afraid of everything. Politicians in general want to do little things so there's no risk involved, but it was short-sighted. In the long term, it's better to not say that because you want to work with them. So much of this reminds me of the social rules I experienced growing up in school. Don't be too emotional. It's friend solidarity. Don't snitch your brown nose. Don't follow stupid rules. Mayhaps it's not just work crews who have these unspoken group rules? Pivot. Peterson then talks about the old Charles Atlas ads that would run in comic books. And when I say talk, he basically goes through the full story of the ad. From the Chad kicking sand in the beta's face, being emasculated by his date, doing the one simple trick to Chaddom, and earning his place at the top of the beach's dominance hierarchy. Not in those words, of course. Peterson has more to say about this, but it's interesting to see those tropes get echoed later on with the incel versus Chad imagery. It's almost like our culture puts an emphasis on men being a certain way, and anything less than that is worthy of mocking and derision. Speaking of,
that ad is famous for a reason. It summarizes human sexual psychology in 7 straightforward panels. The 2-week young man is embarrassed and self-conscious, as he should be. What good is he? He gets put down by other men, and worse, by desirable women. Instead of drowning in resentment and skulking off to his basement to play video games in his underwear covered in Cheeto dust, he presents himself with what Alfred Adler, Freud's most practical colleague, called a compensatory fantasy. The goal of such a fantasy is not so much wish fulfillment as illumination of a genuine path forward.
So the ad's protagonist finds himself incomplete, is presented with a product to fix that incompleteness, buys it, and finds himself complete. Not just complete though. Mac wins, so does his eventual girlfriend, so does everybody else. Do we though? In a relatively early video on this channel, I talked about body dysmorphia. This is a psychological disorder where a person believes that they have some physical flaw with their body and engages in behaviors to either try to hide or fix this flaw. And this flaw may be real, but blown out of proportion or not even noticeable to others. And a key part of this is that there are obsessive and/or intrusive thoughts about this flaw for that person. One way this disorder can manifest itself, mostly in men, is in a perceived lack of muscle. And this can result in compulsive exercise and dieting to try to fix that flaw. Certainly doesn't sound like winning to me. I also want to draw attention to Peterson's emphasis on how bad this not alpha dude bro should feel for not fitting the masculine mold, and the stereotypes he uses to back up this argument. Really makes you wonder if this was the approach he used with former clients.
It is to women's clear advantage that men do not happily put up with dependency among themselves. Part of the reason that many a working class woman does not marry now, as we have alluded to, is because she does not want to look after a man struggling for employment as well as her children. And fair enough. A woman should look after her children, although that is not all she should do. And a man should look after a woman and children, although that is not all he should do. But a woman should not look after a man because she must look after children, and a man should not be a child. This means that he must not be dependent. This is one of the reasons that men have little patience for dependent men. And let us not forget, wicked women may produce dependent sons, may support and even marry dependent men, but awake and conscious women want an awake and conscious partner.
Jesus fucking Christ, Peterson, wicked women? This is like the trad version of that broke woke meme, and his heteronormativity is just hanging out in the open at this point. We've got the implicit value of gender roles popping up again. A man should look after a woman, presumably his wife, and kids. A woman is to look after children, not a man, because the man would then also be a child. So what happens if, let's say, the man gets sick and does get looked after by his wife and kids? What happens then? Does he lose his man card? Related to that, since we're directing behavior, what should a person do to enact what's said here? How does the Charles Atlas thing that preceded this have anything to do with not being dependent? How did anything in this section? He keeps saying independence good, dependence bad, but doesn't really elaborate how or why. And a not alpha man could be independent, no? Peterson's two-box problem yet again. Finally, illusions does not a scientific paper or claim make. The previous variant of this claim from this chapter was about women contributing to the hollowing out of the middle class because they were trying to marry up financially. This claim doesn't seem to be coming from anything substantive, just Peterson's opinion. Next, Peterson talks about how the bully in The Simpsons was integral in keeping the school from being overrun by Millhouses, Martin Princes, and Ralphs.
Muntz is a corrective, tough, self-sufficient kid who uses his own capacity for contempt to decide what line of immature and pathetic behavior simply cannot be crossed. Part of the genius of The Simpsons is its writer's refusal to simply write Nelson off as an irredeemable bully. Abandoned by his worthless father, neglected, thankfully, by his thoughtless slut of a mother, Nelson does pretty well, everything considered. He's even of romantic interest to the thoroughly progressive Lisa, much to her dismay and confusion, for much the same reasons that 50 Shades of Grey became a worldwide phenomenon.
Hey Peterson, your mask slipped off a bit. You might want to fix that. Never thought I'd encounter the position of the bully being the arbiter of social order, but here we are. And I'm sure readers who've been bullied will take comfort in this, that everything awful they experienced at the hands of their bully was really for their own good. I hope it's not a widely held position among counseling or clinical psychologists that it's a good thing that a kid's been neglected by their mother. It's been a while since I watched the episode where Lisa dated Nelson, but part of what I got from the episode is how emotionally damaged Nelson was because of his home life and troubles at school. Lisa tried to change and reform him, but realized that wasn't going to work out, and so that stopped by the end of the episode. Side note, and a kind of lesson from the episode that Peterson either didn't include or didn't get. If you feel like you have to change somebody to fit into a relationship with you, it's probably not a good relationship for either of you right now. If the person wants to go out and make those sorts of changes for themselves and do it to be healthier or happier or just to grow, and then start a relationship with you, you probably have a better chance of that relationship working out. Please don't change people in relationships like this. No. Regardless, Peterson's link between Lisa's crush on Nelson and the dumpster fire relationship in 50 Shades only really works at the superficial good girl likes bad guy level. Yeah, not Bella Swan did try to change not Edward, but there's a lot more that led to 50 Shades being the cultural thing it was than that. For one, the romantic lead is a mega rich playboy bachelor who just happens to take interest in the reader insert character. 2, the protagonist was introduced to a twisted version of what BDSM can entail, going beyond the average reader's vanilla sex experiences. Third possibility is the ludicrous sex scenes, and finally, let us not forget, questionable writing leading to a fair bit of hate reading. Last thing here. It's strange to me that someone would almost hold up Nelson Muntz or Christian Grey as a form of ideal for men to model off of, especially in a self-help book, especially by a clinical psychologist. Peterson asserts that the rise in fascism is because our cultures become too weak and harmless, and this is a result of men being pushed to feminize, and this is the response. Trump's presidency is included as an example of this. Therefore, the way to fix this is for men to toughen up.
Men demand toughening up, and women want it, even though they may not approve of the harsh and contemptuous attitude that is part and parcel of the socially demanding process that fosters and then enforces that toughness. Some women don't like losing their baby boys, so they keep them forever. Some women don't like men and would rather have a submissive mate, even if he's useless. This also provides them with plenty to feel sorry for themselves about as well. The pleasures of such self-pity should not be underestimated.
This type of toughening up isn't something we should be encouraging. Bullying and harassment aren't good things, Peterson. Yeah, some women don't like men. A subset of them are known as lesbians. I doubt a submissive mate would make them straight. What even is this worldview? I want to ask the parents of the kids who are Peterson fans in the Rise of Peterson documentary if they read this book, if they endorse all of the messages in it, because fuck. Peterson says that men toughen up by pushing themselves or others. Direct clarification for what this pushing is not provided, just examples and stories. One example is that guy teens were and are more likely to be in car accidents because of risky behavior. Another example is misbehaving at or quitting school because they were big and strong enough to work on the oil rigs. And finally, they rode motorcycles on the frozen lake. Finally, looping this back to the start of the chapter and the rule name, Peterson says these dangerous behaviors were done to make themselves useful, like the skateboarders in part 1. But these behaviors can go too far, which results in antisocial behavior. Reference 206 is a book detailing a longitudinal study of youths to try and understand sex differences and antisocial behavior. Part of it is up on Google Books, but the places where the preview cuts out is maddening as always. I was able to get my hands on a published book review though. It mentions the book's authors finding some distinguishing characteristics for antisocial behaviors from other psychological disorders, specifically the male bias in these behaviors and the uptick seen in adolescence. The review includes the book's conclusion as indicating that the antisocial behavior seen in roughly 5% of males probably has a strong genetic and biological influence that shows up as neurocognitive differences. But this behavior in females seems to be more environmentally sensitive. As I don't have the book itself, I can't say for certain that Peterson's assertion isn't made in the book. That assertion being that antisocial behavior comes from pushing too hard and trying to make themselves useful. However, from the points the summary emphasizes and the described conclusion, it seems unlikely. Allow me to be a case study in girls being dumb too. One of the stupidest things I did was when I was in high school. I must have been 16 at the time. I was hanging out at Dr. Mr. the boyfriend's house, and a neighbor had some longtime friends visiting, and these friends just happened to have their tricked out drag race cars with them. Like old muscle car, Camaro, and a Mustang, like custom everything, rebuilt engines. They were gorgeous. After talking for a bit and me drooling all over the cars, we're offered rides. We accept. This was incredibly fucking dumb because they had been drinking all day. There is no way in hell they were sober enough to be behind the wheel. I had ever so subtly mentioned that that type of Mustang was the same type my dad had had when he was younger, so that's what I got to ride in. And we went out to a nearby stretch of road that was pretty straight and not terribly busy at that time of night. The speed limit on that road was 40 miles per hour, and we were easily doing double that, if not going 100. I don't remember if there were seat belts. I'm not going to sit here and lie to you. It was an amazing, fun, thrilling experience. I still remember it vividly over 20 years later. But there's so many things that could have gone wrong. This was right next to a residential area. There were so many feeding roads that somebody could have just turned off into without thinking, and there's no way we would have been able to stop in time. Especially because the drivers were drunk. Some sort of wildlife could have wandered onto the road and wreaked havoc. They could have lost control of the cars and wrapped us around a light pole. I remember even joking, as I was getting into the car, that if I died doing this, my dad, who was alive at the time, would understand. Dumb. I can also neither confirm nor deny that I may have or have not driven several cars above 100 miles per hour in open stretches of highway, especially when I was younger. Allegedly. I don't know how any of those alleged occasions didn't end up in a proper car accident. Guess I have a little bit of luck after all. Riding motorcycles on frozen lakes sounds sensational, but from the Canadians I've known, isn't that big of a deal. You've got that and ice fishing for those lakes in the winter, so just don't drive into a fishing hut and you're good. Something I might otherwise have been surprised by, but at this point in the book, whatever. Peterson doesn't talk about the developmental differences in the brain as you go into adulthood, and part of this difference in risky behavior taking between boys and girls may be because the frontal lobe takes longer to mature in boys than it does in girls. The end goal of some of the risky behavior may be to improve competence, but there's probably also a healthy dose of not really being able to fully appreciate the consequences of their actions or inhibit the thrill-seeking as effectively. So, these risky and dangerous behaviors are to promote competence and strength.
If they're healthy, women don't want boys. They want men. They want someone to contend with, someone to grapple with.
I like your spunk. Phrasing. Shut up!
If they're tough, they want someone tougher. If they're smart, they want someone smarter. They desire someone who brings to the table something they can't already provide. This often makes it hard for tough, smart, attractive women to find mates. There just aren't that many men around who can outclass them enough to be considered desirable, who are higher, as one research publication put it, in income, education, self-confidence, intelligence, dominance, and social position.
Obvious misinterpretation aside, a healthy person probably wants somebody who will love them in kind. Being intellectually challenged is important to me in a relationship, but that doesn't mean I sought out somebody smarter than me. I'm not looking to be outclassed by my partner. I'm looking for somebody roughly on my level. Why would I want to be with somebody that is just so smart I can't relate to them? If we're going to be min-maxing our relationships, doesn't it make sense to go for somebody who complements your stats? Like, if you're high on int, go for somebody with strength so that the first goblin you encounter, you're not just smashed into oblivion? I guess this confirms the game's value weight that I'd inferred in part 3. He appears to think that women are below men on the hierarchy. Why else would a woman want someone to outclass her? And why is this only a one-way direction? And I'm again left asking, what happened to the advice about not comparing ourselves to others? This is absolutely breaking with the gist of that. Reference 207 involved people of different age tiers being asked what they'd look for in a partner at different levels of commitment, and echoed the idea that men go for attractiveness, women go for things like income and social position. Something that occurred to me while reading this was to wonder if this was still holding up in literature, and going off of references following up on this paper, there seems to be some discussion about this not being as cut and dry as it had been argued to be. Going back to an idea we've touched on before in this rule, the variability in one gender seems to be greater than the difference between genders. So yeah, about that. Is this supposed to be read as a sort of bootstrapping, pull yourself into manliness sort of thing? Because otherwise the women's won't want you?
The spirit that interferes when boys are trying to become men is, therefore, no more friend to woman than it is to man. It will object, just as vociferously and self-righteously. You can't do it. It's too dangerous. When little girls try to stand on their own 2 feet. It negates consciousness. It's anti-human, desirous of failure, jealous, resentful, and destructive. No one truly on the side of humanity would ally him or herself with such a thing. No one aiming at moving up would allow him or herself to become possessed by such a thing. And if you think tough men are dangerous, wait until you see what weak men are capable of. Leave children alone when they are skateboarding.
Boys get to be rough and tumble, girls get to stand. Wouldn't want to risk being unladylike. And what, pray tell, are weak men capable of? Is this the stuff from Rule 6? The school shooters from Colorado who I still refuse to name? It's amazing how slightly tweaking the context makes a life advice now sound like a threat. Finally for this chapter, I imagine this all fits together in Peterson's head, but all the side journeys into environmentalism, boys being failed by the school system, postmodern neo-Marxism. What? This really feels like a kitchen sink chapter, where all the arguments he wanted to make but couldn't quite fit in elsewhere just got thrown in here. This chapter had a surprising amount of yikes in it. It may have well set the yikes per minute record in this series. As such, let's try to find some less yikesy takeaway messages. Working on improving your skills is a good idea, and to do so you will probably need to be challenged. and these challenges may involve risk. But you can manage those risks, like wearing helmets and pads when you're skateboarding. If you can't understand why someone did something, maybe just ask them. Don't assume you can know what their motivation was from the outcome. No one's a fucking mind reader. If a friend or a loved one is having trouble with life, be there for them, support them, and encourage them to seek help. We are at a point in our society that we can continue to propagate the human species without requiring every couple to produce 2 or more kids. And that's okay. Not having kids is an okay choice, whatever your reason. I highly doubt environmentalism is going to cause a spree of doom dealers. We do need to get serious about climate change, though. Systematic changes need to happen in the US school system. Boys are falling behind early, and it's having consequences down the road. Encouraging, for example, girls to go into STEM or boys to go into nursing is something that needs to happen early, like elementary or middle school. Let kids play. Don't force gender or dominance hierarchies or stuff into their play sessions. If they want to play with a Barbie, cool. If they want to play with a car, cool. If they want to dress up as Princess Batman, cool. Women and men can be attracted to their friends. I would think having a friendship at the core of a romantic relationship would be ideal. It's okay if you don't want to get married. If you do want to get married but don't particularly care about the whatever status of the person, or if you do want to get married to somebody because of some status they have. Whatever. As long as everybody is a consenting adult, have at. It seems like some boomers, Peterson seemingly included, don't really understand the financial hardships that the younger generations face. Dogged determination doesn't go as far as it used to. A historically oppressed group isn't not oppressed because sometimes the oppressors help the oppressed. I'm all for working to make society and culture less oppressive. How about you guys? Check out any of the previously mentioned sources for why postmodern neo-Marxism doesn't make sense as a concept. Also, Marxism, Stalinism, Leninism, Maoism, those aren't the same thing as socialism. Don't let absurdist slippery slope arguments get in the way of trying to effect positive social change. Encouraging boys to be empathetic and cooperative is not going to doom civilization. Regarding Peterson's discussion of assertiveness training, I would instead suggest figuring out what your boundaries are, then getting comfortable communicating and enforcing those boundaries with others. Figure out which ones are flexible and which ones are solid boundaries. And if you have someone in your life who regularly disregards your boundaries, despite attempts to communicate and enforce them, they might not be worth having in your life. It's a them issue, not a you issue. Some social interactions can take the form of friendly teasing, some can be more hostile. This doesn't have to be about the dominance hierarchy or making each other tough. Just have fun. Advertising from the 1940s and 50s should probably not be what you base your ideal form of behavior or body on. Hell, advertising from today isn't what you should be basing your sense of self-worth from. If you have some aspects of yourself that you'd like to improve, go for it. But please don't feel like you have to change yourself to fit some company's idea of what you should be. Do it because it would make you happy or improve your life. And finally, if you're in or are looking to start a relationship with someone else, do it because you like that person. Don't worry about all of the things Peterson, or anyone else for that matter, tells you should like. You know what you like. Or at the very least, you can figure it out with some trial and error. Hopefully, you'll build a relationship on friendship, trust, and respect. And sometimes you might have to give more in the relationship if the other person's going through something. Sometimes you'll be the one needing extra help. Don't feel like less of a person because of this. It happens to everybody. So, yeah. How about we actually just let kids skateboard without loading all of this shit onto them? And that's it for this chapter. Finally. Twitter, Discord, Patreon, links in description. Subscribe, yes. And see you guys in the next one. Bye!